This week, I was going through my closet looking for winter items to donate to that drive that we had yesterday in the Great Hall. And I'm embarrassed to admit that it wasn't that easy for me to do. I found it hard. I would hold a garment and I would go, I should donate this. I never wear it. And then I would think, but if I lost 10 pounds, I would wear this. I actually had a very clear choice in front of me because I only buy a new winter coat every 10 years. You know, it's kind of a big purchase because you need a good winter coat up in these parts. And so once I get one, I take care of it and it lasts 10 years. So I found a good clearance sale last year and I bought a coat, and the coat was so reduced in price that I gave in and I bought myself two, one in gray, one in black. And there was the gray one, tag still on it, on the rack. But I thought to myself, but what if I need a coat in gray? How can I give this up? I think after hearing the story about the widows in the first reading and in the gospel, I don't think I can get away with that attitude so easily. Because these are risk takers. And some of it is natural. If you were a widow in those days, you were already at risk. You already were living dangerously through no fault of your own. It was a very dangerous time economically and situationally to be without the protection of a husband. They were already exposed to danger. So you would think they would be guarded, extra guarded. But we hear in the stories, actually the opposite is true. They're completely unguarded. The one in the temple gave all of her money away, just gave it all. And we get to hear that Jesus admired her. How amazing is that? A lot of us are hoping that Jesus will approve of us on our good days, but how about admire us? Point to us as an example to tell other people to act like we acted. So this weekend, we're being encouraged to consider, how much do we trust God to take care of us? And how much energy and effort do we put into guarding ourselves, protecting ourselves, having backup plans? A lot of us put a lot of our trust in things that are good, but that tell us that we're having some trust issues. Like, we couldn't imagine going without a doorbell camera. We can't imagine life without a 401k. We have a preferred political party, and we put all of our energy into their platform, as if we can stay protected from life if we're just armored up enough. And what we're hearing is, these widows didn't use earthly armor to feel safe. They trusted in God, and they acted accordingly. Of these two, I relate much better to the one in the first reading, because I've been in her story before, and I bet you have too. She's the one who is the person who has just enough to make ends meet. Just enough. She's got enough flour and enough oil for the next meal. Just enough. And it's at that moment that the stranger comes to the door and needs to be fed. That's familiar to us. You know, it's when you have just enough to pay the mortgage or the rent, and then the brakes go on the car. When we have just enough, and then the kids say, we need this money for the field trip that everybody's going on. And it puts everything in flux. That widow asks us to consider, how do I handle it when I have just enough? And then something happens. My Polish grandmother, my babci, was my favorite person. You hear me talk about her a lot. She's up here on the altar of remembrance. The 20th anniversary of her death was this past week. And she talked a lot about her parents, Babcia and Dziadzia, who came from Poland, lived in a little 2-bedroom house in Watervliet and had 12 children. Wow. Władysław, her father, worked in the foundry in Watervliet, and her mother, Josefka, raised 12 children in a 2-bedroom house. They were amazing people, and so much of the character that my grandmother had, she said, came directly from them. They had just enough, not one bit more than just enough. And so each time that Babcia would be expecting another child, my grandmother told me that she would have everybody at the dining room table for dinner that night, and she would tell them with a little ritual prayer. It was the same every time. She would bless the meal on the table, and she would speak to God and say, Lord, if you're going to put another mouth at our table, put more soup in our pot. Amen. And that was the end of the story. If she worried about it after that, she never let on. She just kept feeding more mouths around the table. And there was enough. I know that those kids idolized their parents, and it's because of that kind of faith. A lot of us have strong belief, and strong belief is admirable. But people don't really feel impressed with us if we just believe. If we believe, that's one thing. It's what we do with it. Does our belief make us braver? Does it make us trust more? Does it change the way we live? Do we live differently because we have that belief turned into trust? That is the question we're being asked, because a lot of us are armored up and guarding ourselves with the best kind of technology and know-how that we've got. But these widows are saying, do you have enough trust in God to let God be your shield and not the gadgets that you've turned to keep yourself safe? Every November, the church has us focus on people like these widows and on the destination we're all heading for. This is a month where we think about how short life is and how soon we'll all be getting ready to make our transition, and about what really matters this side of heaven. And one of the things that's interesting that these widows bring up for us is we actually have in the Bible a mathematical formula for how we're supposed to interact with our things. And the mathematical formula is we're supposed to live on 90% of our income, and we're supposed to give the other 10% away. We're not supposed to live on 100%. In fact, the way the scriptures say it, it's as if 10% is in our account, but it doesn't belong to us. It's just passing through. And it requires us to forward it where God wants it to go. So a way to think of this is our spiritual health requires us to give 10% away. If we don't do it, we'll get spiritually arthritic. We'll get congested. We can't kink the hose. It's not good for us. We're not designed for that. So in the Catholic way of approaching this, it's always been kind of understood that it would be a 5% and 5% kind of thing. And that's what I do. It's not always something that I find easy, but it is something that feels like it's a requirement for me as a priest. I give 5% of my income to the parish and 5% to other causes. When I had 2 parishes in the past, I would give 2.5% to each one. Now, here, I give 5% to St. Mary's, and then I've got another 5% that I can use when St. Jude's sends me an envelope. I can use it when good causes say to me, we're trying to make the world a better place, but we need help. Can you help us? I actually keep all of those in a folder. Now that I'm here, I direct some of that other 5% a little bit differently. I give 2% to SMA, and I give 1% to the diocesan appeal. But that still leaves me 2%, which is actually a luxurious amount. It means I get to write several $50 checks a month for whatever cause feels like it's speaking to my heart. I actually get to say yes to that. I get to write those checks and mail them, and it feels like a spiritual workout. It feels like I get endorphins from it. It's for my spiritual health. I think that those widows would approve of that, but I don't think they would call it risky. I don't think those widows would be like, what? You gave 10%? Wow. I don't think they would think that based on what I heard about them. I don't think they'd be that impressed. You mean you had a winter coat in gray and you just gave it up? What if you want to wear a gray coat? They wouldn't have said that. They would have said, that's right. That coat didn't belong to you. That was in your closet, but it actually belonged to someone else. When we have people that are that generous, it doesn't allow us to pretend it's not going on. It's kind of like how forgiveness works. One of the things we're talking about this week in this book that we're reading together as a parish, Everybody Needs to Forgive Somebody, is that there are people who forgive incredible things. Pope John Paul II forgave the person who shot him. The Amish of Nickel Mines, Pennsylvania, forgave the shooter that harmed their children. As long as that's going on, we can't say, but I'll never talk to my ex again. When there's extravagant forgiveness going on, we have to consider how we can forgive a bit more. And when there's extravagant generosity happening, we're being called to consider that too. So, this week, we're being given this opportunity. And the key to it is to know that we cannot possibly outdo God. It's kind of like what Bapcha used to say when she would bless the soup and tell God, if you're going to put another mouth at our table, you've got to put more soup in our pot. She was basically daring God. I dare you not to take care of us. Think of how you'd look if you didn't take care of this family. I dare you. And you know God will take that dare. It happens all the time. There's no way to outdo God, no matter how generous we are. One of our food pantry volunteers a few years ago started making winter wear for the clients of the food pantry. And I don't know if you've noticed, but yarn is one of the things that really is very expensive. A lot of times you think you can save money making your own things, but if you get quality yarn, it's not saving money, it's expensive. And so some of the other volunteers at the food pantry said, well, we'll help buy yarn for you, but, it doesn't go very far. And so they were finding themselves really a little confused about what they should do. Should we do something else? Should we sew instead? That volunteer was thinking about that one day, and she pulled into the post office, and as she was pulling in, somebody else was about to leave, and he just said to her, a stranger, hey, excuse me, do you know anybody who can use some yarn? My wife's got a bunch that she can't use, and it's in the back of our car. Do you know anybody who can use it? That kind of stuff happens all the time. It happens all the time. It's what the widow smiles about from heaven. Oh, there's a little more flour in your jar, is there? A little more oil in your jug? That's how it works. So let us be willing to be brave, knowing that God is the one who's going to watch out for us through it all. And let's remember that when we get to heaven, we're definitely going to want to have a few stories to tell those widows at the orientation, when we have to tell them who gave it all, that we sometimes were just a little bit brave too.